Hello and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today. And in this edition, we will start with these leading stories from the African continent. And Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry discussed on Tuesday with the visiting Sierra Leonean counterpart David Francis bilateral and regional efforts aimed at combating terrorist organizations and organized crime groups in Sahel. Shoukry added that such cooperation has to include reconstruction and post-conflict development endeavors. More in this report.
As Egypt always seeks to create more cooperation and trade independence with other countries in the African continent, there are a number of economic and trade agreements that plays this role. Egypt has a number of trade agreements that link it with 55 African states aiming to increase economic cooperation. Cairo currently working to finish the linkage between the northern tip of the continent with the southern top through several projects, atop of which is a road between Cairo and Cape Town. Perhaps the most prominent trade agreement in the continent is the one with the COMESA. A preferential trade area is signed with the African Trade Bloc that aims to establish a free trade area between member states to become a customs union and then a common market. With reference to the rules of origin of the agreement, customs exemptions are applied to all imports of goods originating from member states with an added value of up to 45%. In March 2018, after 2 years of continuous negotiations, African heads of state and government signed in Kigali, Rwanda, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is the largest trade agreement in the world, and it entered into force on May 30th, 2019, with the ratification of 22 countries, where Egypt was among the first countries that signed and ratified this convention. There is also the road linking Cairo to Dakar in Senegal in West Africa, in addition to a highway that extends across West Africa from Nouakchott to Lagos in Nigeria, as well as the river link between Alexandria and Lake Victoria, which would make the country a gateway to Central Africa via the Nile River.
Was a report on Egypt's cooperation and trade interdependence with other countries in the African continent, and there are a number of economic and trade agreements that play this role, and Egypt has a number of trade agreements that link it with 55 African states aiming to increase economic cooperation. And now we are joined over the phone by Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, Professor of Economics. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So, sir, how do you describe the relation, Egypt's relation with the African countries and its attempts to link and increase cooperation with them?
Well, I think there has been an ongoing trend over the past few years for Egypt to be more involved and engaged in the African continent on many frontiers, and the economic one, of course, is a chief one of these fronts. Egypt has been a very active player, and as mentioned in the report, in trade and both bilateral and multilateral agreements within the African continent, whether regionally, in terms of North Africa and the Eastern African region, and also within the entire continent. The priority or the prioritization that Egypt places on the continent is quite obvious in terms of its policies, in terms of its friendly relationships with neighboring countries, and also in terms of support and work jointly with pretty much all of the African nations, really, to further their development and to enhance their infrastructure. And I think recently we've seen a number of visits from different African leaders to Cairo, and also joint activities, more bilateral and multilateral trade agreements specifically, and more also investment from Egypt in these countries. So economically, I think Egypt has been prioritizing and working very clearly on fostering and furthering its relations with the African continent.
So, sir, how can we increase intra-African trade? And what is the future of intra-African trade?
Well, I think there is a lot of room for exploitation in the African continent. For a very long time, Africa have been looking outward towards other regions, whether Asia or Europe or even the Americas, for partnerships. And there is this close in most of the African countries that mean that their economic sectors are linked in different ways to more developed economies and sectors. And this leads to an imbalance in trade relations between these countries and the rest of the world, because they've been, for the most part, producing or providing primary goods and products for very little profit in return for these primary goods then being produced and technology added to them, and then eventually they end up being resold to the countries of the African continent for a much higher price. So if more integration takes place within the African continent, if countries look for comparative advantages within their own economies, then there will be a lot of room for intra-trade within the African continent between economies that are more similar to each other, that will definitely yield benefits for all of the African continent and the different nations.
So, sir, how do you describe the African market, and do you think that it is ready to receive more Egyptian goods?
Well, I think the African markets are definitely in need of further development. Talking about the infrastructure again, about better water resources, about electricity and electric power generation, but more also paved roads and communication methods and tools between the different sectors. If developed properly, if enhanced properly, then they will definitely help in furthering and establishing the basis for a profound impact on the African markets. And if this happens, then of course they will be more ready to receive investments, and also eventually leading to more profits for both the investors and for the countries that receive these investments.
And sir, Egypt is considered the gate to African states. How can Egypt use its geographical location to serve African countries?
Well, the geopolitical role of Egypt is very important. Location, that's one aspect that can be built on, but location in of itself is insufficient. Of course, you need a very clear-cut support from the state institutions, and we have that. You need also the tools, the resources, the manpower to play such a role. I think Egypt has been going in that, again, direction for quite some time now. But this needs to be also accentuated and enhanced with more invitations, let me say, or openness also to African companies. You have several countries today are candidates for being considered as emerging economies. South Africa, of course, southern region. They have, these hubs, let's say, Egypt in the north, along with other countries like Morocco, for instance, and Nigeria in the west, South Africa in the southern part of the continent. I think it's very important to link also these major countries, because they themselves constitute great opportunities for investment and also potential hubs within these regions. If this link takes place, I think Egypt is definitely very well placed to actualize its role as a major regional hub in the continent.
So, sir, do you think that solving the problem of transportation and linking African countries via roads and solving this problem will help in boosting economic integration?
Well, definitely. Because the infrastructure is one of the main tools for achieving development. You cannot possibly have comprehensive social and economic development without having the necessary infrastructure for that. And of course, roads, communication in general, transportation, of course, plays a major role in that process. So for a very long time, not only because of the lack of this infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, but also because of the context, the political context, the the military conflicts happening within the African continent, civil strife and so forth, all of these factors led to the inability of African countries to maximize the potential of their own economies. Yes. And with more stability, with more peace and security established in the different regions, these roads can then be developed, can be enhanced, and of course, I mean, having them enhanced along with other methods of transportation, like also naval transportation, and also through railways, all of these sectors would definitely only be helpful in terms of furthering development and intra-trade relations within the African nations.
Yes, Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, Professor of Economics, thank you, sir, for being with us. And going back to our leading stories today from the African continent, and following the harsh economic effects of coronavirus pandemic around the world, people of Burundi have turned to a rare type of business to get back to a good financial standing. More in this report.
Egypt and Sierra Leone signed on Tuesday a number of agreements for cooperation in the fields of political consultation, youth and culture. The agreements were signed by Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and his Sierra Leone counterpart David Francis, who is visiting the country on top of an official delegation. Shoukry and Francis exchanged views on a number of bilateral issues and regional causes of mutual interest. The top diplomats expressed their aspiration to enhance the level of trade exchange to be on par with political relations between the two countries. Shoukry said that Egypt will send a package of medical aid to Sierra Leone to help support the health sector there. Shoukry urged intensifying bilateral and regional efforts to combat terrorist organizations and organized crime groups in the Sahel region, as well as reconstruction and development process needed during the post-armed conflict stage. The talks also touched upon joint coordination regarding an African call to reform and expand the Security Council in light of Sierra Leone's presidency of the African Union's Committee of 10 concerned with the matter. Only one seat is designated for Africa out of the 10 non-permanent seats, so the African countries want to expand the UN organ to be included in the permanent membership, as well as increase the African representation in the non-permanent seats.
That was a report on Egypt's relation with Sierra Leone, as Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry discussed on Tuesday with the visiting Minister of Sierra Leone, David Francis, bilateral and regional efforts aimed at combating terrorist organizations and organized crime groups in Sahel. Shoukry added that such cooperation has to include reconstruction and post-conflict development endeavors. Now we move to another story from Africa, and it's about Burundi and coronavirus.
Emerging. To many Burundians, snakes symbolize demons. Its slightest presence in homes lead to its quick death, and only grown men and only the bold ones dare to attack snakes. Nevertheless, this is a very important source of income to its breeders, a new profession in Burundian society. In Bujumbura, one of the breeders has about 30 snakes and affirms that they are not naturally dangerous. He said that a snake can only bite someone if it is provoked or if it is stepped on. Here at home, people don't know its importance. They compare it to demons and kill it. These snakes are usually kept in cages. They are then tamed to make them get used to human presence. Some say it's a job that it is still ignored but profitable. He added that they make bags and belts. When they collect the snakes from the forest, they put each one in its cage. The breeders largely regard snake breeding as a profitable but ignored business where they can earn as much as 600 euros. But it takes commitment such as being comfortable with the snakes and keeping them clean. These breeders do also sell snake meat to maximize their incomes, and they are now calling on youth to venture into this rare business in the country. Snake business has also attracted a number in the national museums. Some tourists also visit private farms to see these snakes.
Well, dear viewers, that's all for Africa Today. Stay tuned for more is coming up on Nile TV International.